I remember being woken to him, first of all, asking me for money. When I said no, I just remember thud. And the first thud was on my head. I could feel that he had shoes on. I looked across and my bedding, which was white, was completely red, covered in blood. He was sitting the other side of the bed with a meat cleaver, chopping at his wrist, saying, "We're going together, babe." So I grew up with my father. I lost my mum when I was 6 years old. She died of cancer. And so I was raised by my dad, and I ended up with a step family from the age of around 8, 9. I mean, I left home quite young. I left home at 17 and became very independent very young, and then had various relationships. So, I mean, we talk about the abuser, it's just the attacker and the attack that we're here to talk about today. But actually, there were other relationships that were problematic. It was only kind of like when I got to that one, that was the turning point. Well, I almost died, so of course it was. But, you know, I've been in long-term relationships which were fine and ended normally. But the relationship that I had previous to the guy who almost killed me, Jason Smith, that was also a bad relationship, and it's the father of my daughter. So there has been difficulties, but I don't think if you speak to any woman on the street, we've all got stories to tell, you know, so I'm not unique. I'd ended the relationship with my daughter's father quite some time before, and I was living with my dad. I was a single professional mother, and I was going out and doing, you know, working, having to travel for business meetings and things. My dad was very much a support system for me. I met Smith chatting on Facebook, actually. And I used to use Facebook for like marketing purposes. I used to have a shop in the town where I lived. And so he happened to be on my friends list. I don't know how he got there, probably from me like adding people, trying to promote the shop, etc. Anyway, we started chatting on Facebook. And so it was very easy. And then looking at his profile, he was a single dad. I was a single mom. He also, we had quite a bit in common because he used to sell cars. I used to sell cars. So we kind of had a lot to talk about. So it kind of evolved from there to the point where he'd asked me out for a date. And then we went to my local pub. And then he, at the end of that date, which was great, by the way, you know, at the beginning, it was like he was really attentive. We were talking. He was very charismatic, you know, confident. And, you know, I just thought, wow, I can't believe this guy's single, you know. At the end of the date, he dropped me home in a taxi. I told him that I worked from home. And then the next day, I got a text saying, "Look outside." And it was him. And I was a little bit taken aback because it was like literally the first date was only the night before. And he was like, "Oh, I was just passing. I just thought I'd pop by." And I kind of was a little bit uncomfortable with it. But then my dad kind of walked out to the garden and I was like, "Well, yeah, get back in, Dad." And he was like, "Oh, is that the guy that you went on a date with?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Oh, well, he's keen." And it was kind of laughed off, you know, as if it was some sort of flattery. When I look back with hindsight, he was breaking boundaries from day one. You know, even to the point where when we were chatting online on Facebook, there was a new function that they'd introduced where you could call somebody and they defaulted it to be switched on. And I remember one day my laptop was open on the kitchen side and it started ringing. I thought, what's going on? And it was him. So, you know, these kind of breaking down my boundaries, seeing what he could get away with very early on, that was already happening at the start. We started dating and we were dating for a number of weeks, and then my dad became really poorly and he ended up, he was quite severely, he had a thing called Guillain-Barré, which then he ended up in intensive care on a tracheotomy. He was induced into a coma, so it was all really traumatic. And obviously my dad was my support system at home, so he used to often take the children to and from school if I had meetings or whatever. And then I obviously spoke to Jason about this, and we discussed it, and he said, look, I can help you. Let me help you. Let me help with the children. My work's flexible. And, even my friends were saying, God, it's, it's amazing. It's like he's your savior. He's actually being able to take the kids, and God, what would you have done without him? So very much like feeding into that kind of narrative that he was saving me. Even then there was a feeling, there was a gut feeling that actually this is a bit too much. But because of what was going on with my dad and, my children were so young, I was having to deal with working full time, being looking after the house, dealing with dad in hospital, dealing with young children. So it was a lot. And, he did step up and he was helping, and it was brilliant, but it was months into the relationship when that started to change, where I think he thought that he'd invested enough in the relationship with me that I would then start to accept certain behaviour. The manipulation started quite early on. So if I was trying to arrange to go out with the girls, he would be arranging something instead. So we'd book a hotel and say, yeah, but I've booked this for us. Why would you go out with? So it was very, very subtle. And what we've got to remember is he is a master manipulator, that he's honed his techniques by the time he'd got to me. As the relationship progressed, we'd been on holiday together. I've met his daughter, he met my children, and then we became very entwined. He didn't actually move in with me officially, but he was pretty much spending a lot of time with mine. But he would know where I was, but I wouldn't necessarily know where he was, which at the time I didn't think like that. So I wasn't thinking, oh, I don't know where he is and he knows where I am. It's just now when I look back, I went out on a night out with the girls and I ended up going back to a friend's house, and he messaged me saying, well, why are you at this address? And I was like, how do you even know I'm there? So, and this is it, these small little things like red flags that they're niggles at the time. They're not something that you would pick up and think, oh my God, this guy's an abuser. It doesn't work like that, because when you've been in a relationship, or when you're in a relationship, you're investing time and effort, and, you've integrated them into your life. So it's not a case of, even if somebody does recognize something that's uncomfortable, you don't just switch off, we're human. So we're talking like 8-9 months into the relationship, and all of the things that he used to kind of manipulate me and get me control what was going on with what was going on in my life. So in terms of picking up the children, being really helpful, all of that was then starting to shed away. So he was stopping to do those things. The things that he was able to do and wanted to do at the beginning was then all too difficult, which was then, of course, creating more problems for me, because then it was like, how do I then conduct my life if I can't get somebody to look after the children? So I'm a resourceful person, I ended up getting a childminder and sorting things out. But this, all of this, it was always as if I was fighting against this kind of manipulative behaviour. But I would not have recognised that back then. It's only when I look back with hindsight, I realise what was going on. The decision came when he lost his job and he started to drink in the day. And then it was a case of he was staying in bed all day. Then he was having these really dark days where he wouldn't get out of bed at all, drinking. And I was just like, look, I can't have this. I can't have this around the children. I've got work, I'm busy, and, I'm still dealing with dad in hospital. And I asked him to leave and go and stay at his parents so we could have some space. But that was the point where I feel like a switch had been flicked, because he then started to call me, many, many times a day, to the point where I was like, look, Jason, you can't keep ringing me, I'm working. And I mean, this is at the beginning, so this is gradual. So this is a gradual thing. So at the moment, he's still thinking we're in a relationship and we're just having some, and I'm trying to let him down gently. So I'm trying to create some distance. But actually, the more I try and create distance is the more he's trying to reach in. Then it got to the point where I was like, look, do you know what? Actually, like, I just want a clean break. I just want to cut off, because you're not accepting what I'm saying. And some of the bits and pieces that he had at mine, I went and dropped them to his parents and said, look, that's it. But at that point then, the number of calls and the texts and the emails and the WhatsApps and the Facebook all increased. It was just consistently all day, every day, to the point where I had to call the police. Then he was kind of going from, I love you, to Zoe, I'm coming home. I'm like, okay, this isn't your home. Then it was like, if you don't let me in, I'm going to come through the door. So then it was threatening me. But when I called the police were saying, well, he hasn't really done anything yet, has he? So, give us a call when he's done something. And you're just completely disregarded and met with this wall of what you're reporting is like minimised in some way, like it's not important. One time they came out, 2 male police officers, walked into my kitchen, looked at my kitchen, looked at each other, said, started making jokes. Oh, this is a nice kitchen. Don't show my wife this kitchen. Oh, you need to get yourself a nice boyfriend. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink. Really unprofessional and just outrageous, really, because nobody calls 999 as a calm thing. If you're calling 999, you're distressed. So the last thing you need is 2 police officers turning up thinking this is some kind of joke. At that point, I was then playing them the voicemails that he was leaving, and he was pretending to kill himself. So in one, he was saying, baby, I love you, I'm sorry, I'm going to come home. Others, he was saying, if you don't open the door, I'm coming through the door. Then others were saying, I'm going. And he was pretending to kill himself. That's a prerequisite to homicide. That is a huge red flag. That's something that they should have picked up on, the police. They also didn't collect that evidence. When you make that 999 call and you're presented with police officers, that first response is so important, because that response then led to me not ringing the police again until he ended up smashing in my door. So one Saturday afternoon, I came home. I had my 4-year-old daughter with me at the time, and walked into my kitchen, and I've got big windows at the back of the kitchen, and he was standing in my garden. Well, of course, I was shocked and horrified, because my garden's closed, so there's no, he would have had to break the gate to get through. He'd obviously broken the gate to get into the garden. He'd been waiting for me. I screamed, and then I saw his face turn to anger, run round to the side of the house, and then I could hear him kicking the door. At this point, I took my daughter up the stairs, and unbelievably, there was like a hailstorm at the time, so I was trying to distract her and saying, oh, look out the window. All the while I was on 999, calling the police again, saying, he's here, he's now smashing the door in, please send somebody now, he's coming through the door. And I was like, he's in the house. I could hear him coming up the stairs. And then he come into the room that I was in, and I just looked at him and looked at Sophia and was like, what are you doing? And he fell to his knees crying, saying, why won't you speak to me? And I was like, you need to run, the police are coming. And I think in his deluded mind, he thought that somehow I was helping him. He was like, I need to go. And I was like, yeah, they're coming. So he ran off. And I called the police. When the police arrived a couple of minutes later, I said, that's where he's gone. He pointed up the road, and they went and picked him up. And then one of the police officers came back and said, oh, you don't need to press charges. You can just, it's up to you. I was like, well, I worked in criminal screening at the time. So I was like, well, if you don't charge him, it's not going to go on his record. Also, he smashed through my entire UPVC side door. I need to claim on my insurance. If he's not charged, then, so I've got to pay for that? No. And all the while, my response to this wasn't a fear. I'm not a fearful person. We talk about fight, flight, freeze. My natural reaction to things is fight. So I was furious. I was more angry about what was going on. And the risks are still there, whether I'm angry or whether I'm fearful. But I think when you're dealing with the police and you're coming across as angry, they just think, well, there's not a problem here because she doesn't seem like she's scared. And they did a DASH risk assessment on me. And one of the questions on the DASH risk assessment is the victim fearful? And the answer was no. But that doesn't mean there isn't any risk. And so, when they arrested him, they charged him with criminal damage. Then they said, well, then they just bailed him. So, of course, he was just allowed to leave the police station, and he just continued.
Hi, and welcome to Deep. We love making videos, meeting people and letting them tell their stories.
We really hope you're enjoying the channel, and if you are and would like a bit more,
We've just launched the series as a podcast on Spotify.
It's the full interviews uncut, so you can hear the whole thing, wherever you are, at home or on the go.
But no matter where you're watching the content, please remember to like, comment and subscribe, as it really helps the channel.
And don't forget to drop a comment below and tell us who you'd like us to talk to next.
Thank you. Now, back to our story.
Okay, cool.
So it was at that point that I thought, I'm going to have to go and meet him and talk sense into him and try and reason with his better side. I don't know. You know, my hands were tied at this point. So I took a call from him. I said, you know, let's meet. Let's go meet in a local bar. And I knew that it'd be busy. I know people in there. And then he was saying, look, I'm going to sort myself out. I know what, I've been terrible lately. I'm really sorry. And oh my God, I can't believe what I've done to my door. I'll get my dad to fix it. His dad is a builder. People kept coming over to the table because I knew people in there. And he was like, we're not getting any privacy here. Can we please go back to yours? I just want to show you these emails that I've got, this new job that I've got set up, lined up. I'd had a glass of wine and he was the old Jason. He was the old Jason that I remembered. And you don't want them to be this unravelled person. You don't want them to be this broken person who's acting erratically. You can't get your head around it. You want the person that you first met to come back. So we went back to mine and, I was still angry. And, we were stood in my kitchen and I was angry with him. And I was saying to him, I'm embarrassed. You've smashed in my door. I've got boards at my door. I mean, how do you expect me to even get over this? I'm furious, to be honest with you. I'm not, and we can't just get back together. That doesn't work like that. I didn't know then what I know now, that I was in an enormous amount of danger. But anyway, it got late and I said to him, look, you can either sleep on the sofa or let yourself out. I'm going to bed. I went to bed. It was then that I remember being woken to him, first of all, asking me for money. When I said no, I just remember thud, and the first thud was on my head. I could feel that he had shoes on, and it was just the most strangest experience because I just remember flying from one side of the bed to the other, and I said in the most normal voice, what are you doing that for? And then I just remember thud raining down on me, and I must have lost consciousness. The next thing I remember is coming round, slumped over the side of the bed and looking down at my hands, covered in blood. I was in an enormous amount of pain. My head was hugely swollen. You've probably seen the injury pictures that are online. I could feel that my head was twice the size. I could see the blood everywhere. I looked across and my bedding, which was white, was completely red, covered in blood. He was sitting the other side of the bed with a meat cleaver, chopping at his wrist, saying, we're going together, babe. And it was at that point that I just was like, and I had like an adrenaline rush. And I thought, he's going to kill me. I've got to get out of here. I remember I've got a chaise at the end of the bed and he had the laptop open. There was like an 8-inch knife at the end of the bed. I managed to get down the stairs. My bedroom's in the loft. I managed to get down the 2 flights of stairs, went into the lounge, tried to pick up the landline and press 999. Thinking if that call connects, the police will come. That call didn't connect, but the phone I threw on the sofa. He walked into the room and was like, what are you doing? Walked me back upstairs. And at this point, that's when I was pleading for my life because I was like, Jason, I'm dying. I'm dying. Please call me an ambulance. Please call me an ambulance. I'm dying. And at this point, I don't know whether he thought he could get away with it because I'd gained consciousness. So he called 999. There was a 13-minute call to the ambulance. He said we'd been in a fight with knives, indicating that we both had knives, which is outrageous. I mean, I had so many injuries. And I've got the transcript of that call. It's so harrowing. I'm in the background saying, I'm dying, help me, help me. And the operator's saying, hold a towel to her neck, is there blood? And just trying to keep him on the call until the police arrive. The next thing I remember is the police at the door and them shouting my name. He must have been coherent enough to go and unlock the door because that's how they got in. But yet he was then lying on the kitchen floor with his eyes rolling in his head. I don't know, pretending what. Then the next thing I remember was being stretchered out and in A&E. And I remember hearing him shouting in A&E. So they'd took me to the same hospital and he was in the next bay, which is just unbelievable, really. And these are the things that, as a victim, that you have to deal with. You know, there's no thought to, clearly I was the victim. You know, he had superficial wounds to his wrists. My injuries, I had a bleed on the brain, cracked eye socket, broken nose. My head was hugely swollen. I had lacerations to my chin, torso, broken right arm, stab wound to the back of my left hand, which bruised the palm of my hand, so the knife almost went through. And I'd lost about 2 pints of blood. So, you know, I'm lucky to be alive. So he was remanded immediately. So he was straight away sent to prison. And his initial charge was attempted murder. I remember being in the hospital bed and I suppose like I was disassociated, like I disassociated myself to the actual violence. But it's also disbelief, like, wow, like how did I not recognise that he was this violent person? Like, but my disbelief was more so not about inwardly looking. It was like, what's wrong with him? You know, what would make a person do that to another person? Why the knives? Why that level of violence? Like, he's 15 stone, 6 foot tall. Like, look at me, 5'2", you know, it's like, no, I don't get it. So disbelief, and then, you know, a huge fear for my children because both of them, they have different fathers. There's an age gap between my son and my daughter. But my daughter's father was also abusive and, you know, I'd had police involvement there, but it was no way to the level of violence that Jason was at. But then that gave him then an opportunity to resurrect his abuse and then blame me for the violence that I received. And that's pretty much how society then treats you as a victim of domestic abuse. It's as if, well, what did you do to deserve that? You know, I remember when the first story went in the press and it was like, it was shared about 7,000 times. It was like, it went viral and it was like global, all people all over the world like contacting me. Most were great, but then lots of men saying, well, I wonder what she did to deserve that. But isn't it interesting how you need to do something to deserve that level of violence, but what does deserve that level of violence? It's crazy. Like, what mentality is it that you would ask that, even ask that question? I didn't look in the mirror for about 2 weeks because I just didn't want to see my face. It was like awful. And I remember friends visiting me in the hospital and I was repeating myself because of the bleed on the brain. I was repeating myself. And then I could tell by their face, they were doing like sideward glances at each other. And I said, I've just said that, haven't I? And then I remember the surgeon coming around and saying, you know, we need to take your bandage off your left hand. And I just thought I couldn't move my hand because it was bandaged. And then they took the bandage off and I, oh my God, what's going on? And they said, you know, you might never use that hand again. I was like, what? No, absolutely no. That is not happening. That is not happening. You know, so, I mean, I have almost, not quite fully got 100%, but almost 90% of use back on my hand. But, you know, again, mind over manipulators, the name of my book, but I talk about that a lot. Like, your mind is so strong. And the anger that I felt throughout all of it, the run up, afterwards, even in hospital, I channeled that to them come out the other side. But it was while I was in hospital that I found out that he was a serial perpetrator. One of my friends came to visit me and said, he's done this before, Zoe, to a police officer. I was like, what? So that anger then was just, how on earth could I then call that same police force and them not respond, them say to me, somehow he hasn't done anything, call us when he's done something. What do you mean? He's done this before. And then I now know, once my story went in the papers, 13 of the women came forward at the time. 13. And that since has increased to 18. So it was not just the police officer. There were many in between. So her case was 10 years prior to mine, but there was many others in between that. And, they were saying to me, they were contacting me on social media saying, oh my God, I went on a date with this guy. He literally was like, checking where I was going and, talking about all these stalking behaviours. There was 2 female CID officers that came to see me at the hospital, and they said, we're going to reduce the charge to GBH Section 18. It still carries the same, it can carry life. But we're going to do that because it's very hard in a domestic to get an attempted murder, because actually you've then got to prove beyond reasonable doubt that he was trying to kill you. But actually he made the 999 call, so he could then use that and say, but I was just, going to inflict pain or whatever. So that charge would then mean he wouldn't get convicted, which means he would have walked out of court. So, of course, the GBH Section 18 makes more sense in terms of a charge, because actually that's grievous bodily harm, and which is serious. To be honest with you, every single year I've had to fight to keep him behind bars. So that wasn't just a point in time. That was just another thing that I had to deal with. So 2014, I was nearly murdered. He wasn't sentenced until 2015. So then we had all the court case and everything then. Then 16, 17, he appealed. Then 18 or 19, I had 2 police officers turn up at my house and say, oh, we're thinking about putting him into open conditions because he's about a third of the way through his sentence. I was like, well, you must be crazy. This guy is a serial offender and he keeps doing this time and time again. And they said, well, and I just thought, well, there's no point in arguing with these police officers. I wrote to the Justice Minister at the time, Robert Buckland, and said, what on earth's going on here? Are you out of your mind? And he wrote back to me and said, which was quite useful actually, because he then said he was already in open conditions. So actually they had illegally moved him into open conditions without me knowing, putting me and my family at risk. Because my story went in the press, because there's been a lot of kind of media and public interest in my case, I've got a good group of people around me, and I've got a legal team that then said, whoa, hold on a second, this is, we need to get him moved back to closed conditions because this is crazy. You can't just do that. So we then created a judicial review where you're going to take them to court for a breach of process. They then it didn't even get to that. They just moved him straight back to closed conditions. And then, while behind bars, he wrote to my son's father. He wrote to Laura Richards, who is the founder of Paladin, the National Stalking Advocacy Service. He wrote to journalists who wrote articles about me. And all of this was trying to smear my name. So he was saying I was lying, I was making it up, I fell. How I fell, stabbed myself and broke my bones, I don't know. When it got to the point of him being released, it was just another thing that I had to deal with. So, of course, it was like, yeah, he's going to be released. But on the run up to that, he went in front of the parole board, which I read my own victim impact statement. And again, they were saying, oh, you don't need to do that, we can do that for you. Well, no, I need you to hear the emotion. I need you to understand the level of upset and disarray he's caused in my life. It just every day I have to deal with something. My children have to deal with something. My son had to have counselling at school. My children were separated because I ended up in a family court situation where I had to fight to get residency back of my daughter. And all because of him, all because of this attack. And even from behind bars, he was still contacting me. So when he was on remand, he then called me saying, one Saturday afternoon, I had a unknown number call my mobile and I answered it. And he was like, hey, baby, it's me. And actually, when I reported it to the police, they then said, oh, but he's already in the justice system, so what do you expect us to do? Huh? It's witness intimidation. Why am I telling you what the law is? Isn't this your job? So anyway, I ended up making 2 statements. But this is what I mean. I was constantly having to fight the system. Now, look, I know that and like I said at the beginning, fight, flight, freeze, I'm challenge everything. Not all victims are like me. Many are broken, and having to deal with a system that is just constantly weighted against you as the victim, it's outrageous, to be honest with you. It's disgusting. It's re-traumatizing, and it has to change. It's not fair. How is the perpetrator allowed to just sit pretty in their little cell, getting their 3 meals a day, getting their free legal advice on how to get away with stuff, and yet the victim is just re-traumatized over and over and over again. Not only was I having to deal with CID, who were wanting me to be this broken victim, come across as a victim because that looks better in court. Then when I'm going to family court fighting for custody of my daughter, I then have to come across as a strong, stoic person who can deal with things. It's how many hats do you want me to wear? And this is the level of pressure that we're putting on victims. It's not right. I mean, we've changed a number of laws, and, we've had stalking protection orders brought in. We had the stalking laws extended from 5 years to 10 years. I was involved in the domestic abuse bill where we had laws changed within the family courts. But I have to say that all of that work was done over the previous 10 years. Not a lot has changed. Specifically in family court, we're in the hands of judges to decide whether or not they want to use those laws. We have the domestic abuse bill, but you're at the hands of police officers that have got a biased view of women, and there's even reports that half the police force, male police force, are perpetrators because they've been charged with some sort of domestic abuse, yet we're sending these people out to attend 999 calls where there's domestic abuse. It's just bonkers. So the injustice of it, I can't stand injustice. And so that's what compelled me to make a difference, to fight to have these changes. And, long nights, early mornings, going on to TV shows, talking about my story, still doing it today. That's why I'm here talking to you. We have to continue the conversation. We have to keep talking about the failures. And there's so much in my case, there's so many failures that happened, and I'm not unique. This happens all the time. It isn't necessarily articulated in a way that people will listen to it or people will understand it. Or victims don't want to talk about it. They just want to forget what they've been through and they just want to get on with their lives. Whereas for me, I just can't stand it. I want things to change. And I've got a daughter and I've got a son, and my son's 19 now, my daughter's 15. They don't have any of these behaviours and they absolutely understand kind of what this looks like. And I want that to be normal. It isn't okay to abuse somebody else. And what is going on in their world, in the perpetrator's world, to make them think it's okay. And something that I've campaigned for over the last 10 years is for serial abusers of domestic abuse and stalking, serial perpetrators of domestic abuse and stalking, to be put on a register like sex offenders, so that then they can be proactively tracked and monitored. So then the police are looking at the perpetrator. The lens is at the perpetrator, not the victim. Because a lot of the things that we've changed over the years have just, in my eyes, have been sticking plasters. Protection orders. Look, we're asking for somebody that's unreasonable to behave with a reasonable request. Stop contacting your victim because you're going to have this order slapped on you. They don't care. They don't care about a piece of paper. For me, having a register, having that joined up working, having a database that other services across the justice system can access the relevant information at the right time, and I always say right data, right time, then that will save lives. If you're in a new relationship, and your gut feeling's telling you it's not right, listen to your gut, please. We have instinct for a reason. I overrode mine all the time. And that's one thing that I absolutely will take away from all of the things that I've gone through, is that my gut feeling was right. and I should have gone with my gut. Secondly, you can do a Clare's Law. If you do feel like that and you are in a new relationship, do utilise Clare's Law and do a check, because then you will know if they've got a history of this. And there's never just a one-time offence. There's always a history. There's always a backstory. And then for somebody who's going through this, report it to the police. I know I've said a lot here about how poorly the police responded in my case, but they're not all like that. And there are good police officers out there. But if you are reporting and you come up against police officers that aren't taking it seriously and they're making jokes and, you know, you have a similar situation to what I've described, go to a specialist charity like Paladin, the National Stalking Advocacy Service, or any of the other national charities. Get advice, ask them to advocate on your behalf. They will then work with you and they will talk to the police on your behalf. That then gives more weight to what you're saying to the police. They will also then risk assess your situation. They will then be able to provide you with advice about staying safe and whether or not you should come out of the relationship and, you know, what you should do in those situations. And for me, silence is an abuser's first weapon of choice. They want to silence you. They don't want you to talk to anyone. They will want to try and isolate you. And those kind of behaviours will be prevalent at the beginning. You know, very much so Jason tried to keep me away from my friends, tried to turn me away, turn me against my friends. Very convenient when my dad ended up in hospital, because then I was very much on my own. The only people he needed to get rid of was my friends. So I started to make comments, or you know, when I made plans to go out with friends, trying to stop that. So isolation, controlling, it's a grooming, it's a form of grooming. And it's those kind of behaviours that you need to look out for.